Ivan the Terrible was the first Tsar of Russia, known for centralizing power, expanding his empire, and ruling with a mix of vision and brutality. Though his name is often remembered with fear, the real story behind Ivan's life is far more complex and often forgotten. In this episode, we'll explore how Ivan rose to power, from his troubled childhood in the court of Moscow to the political landscape of the Russian state. We'll examine his administration, his wars, his reforms, and his infamous reign of terror. We'll also look at the legacy he left behind, a Russia forever changed by one man's quest for absolute authority. Join us as we uncover the truth behind the myth of Ivan the Terrible. Our story begins in medieval Rus, a shifting network of East Slavic principalities and tribes under the semi-legendary Rurik dynasty. According to the primary chronicle, compiled centuries later, in 862, the people of Novgorod, tired of internal strife, invited Rurik, a Varangian or Scandinavian chieftain, to rule them. While the details surrounding Rurik are shrouded in legend, he is generally considered a historical figure and the founder of the Rurik dynasty, a cornerstone of Rus's power structures. Kievan Rus was never a centralized state. Instead, it functioned as a loose confederation of principalities: Novgorod, Kiev, Chernigov, Vladimir Suzdal, and others, each ruled by competing branches of the Rurikids. Kiev initially held prestige as the mother of Rus's cities, but by the 12th century, power had begun shifting northward due to dynastic fragmentation and trade route changes. Then came the Mongols. In 1237 to 1240, the armies of Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, swept through Rus, annihilating cities like Kiev and Vladimir. The Mongols established the Golden Horde, which demanded submission from the Rus princes. Contrary to popular belief, the Horde did not directly occupy Rus. Instead, they ruled indirectly, allowing local princes to govern, so long as they paid tribute and pledged loyalty. This was the world of Alexander Nevsky, Prince of Novgorod, and later Grand Prince of Vladimir. Famed for defeating the Swedes in 1240 and Teutonic Knights in 1242, Alexander faced an impossible choice: resist the Mongols and risk annihilation, or submit and preserve his people's fragile autonomy. He chose the latter, securing Mongol favor while fending off Western crusaders, a policy that later made him a Russian national hero, though modern historians debate whether resistance was ever viable. After Alexander's death, his youngest son, Daniel, inherited the small and insignificant principality of Moscow. At the time, Moscow was a minor fortress town, overshadowed by Tver, Ryazan, and even Novgorod. Yet over the next century, Moscow's princes used shrewd diplomacy, strategic marriages, and, critically, loyal service to the Golden Horde to expand their influence. Daniel's grandson, Ivan I, who was also called Moneybag, perfected this strategy. By ruthlessly collecting tribute for the Mongols and suppressing rival princes' revolts, he won the title of Grand Prince of Vladimir, a position that granted him authority over other Rus's lands. Moscow's wealth grew, and by the mid-14th century, it had become the dominant power in northeastern Rus, though it was still far from a capital in the modern sense. The Golden Horde's grip weakened in the 15th century due to internal strife, allowing Moscow to assert itself. Ivan III, or Ivan the Great, ceased tribute payments, annexed Novgorod in 1478, and Tver in 1485 and in 1480, faced down the Horde at the Great Stand on the Ugra River, a bloodless confrontation that symbolically ended Mongol dominance. By marrying Sophia Palaiologina, a Byzantine princess, Ivan adopted the legacy of Rome, proclaiming Moscow the Third Rome. Into this legacy, in 1530, Ivan IV was born, the first ruler to be crowned Tsar of all Russia, in 1547, marking the birth of a centralized Russian state. Before Ivan IV ascended the throne, Russia was less a kingdom than a patchwork of competing powers. The Grand Duchy of Moscow had risen to dominance, yet its authority was fragile, enforced through tribute deals with the crumbling Golden Horde and marriages with rival princes. Even as Ivan III threw off the Mongol yoke in 1480, the scars of 2 centuries of horde rule persisted. A distrust of outsiders, a nobility accustomed to autonomy, and a land fractured by clan loyalties. The Orthodox Church, calling Moscow the Third Rome, provided a facade of unity. The head of the church officially blessed Moscow's rulers as God's chosen leaders, justifying their wars against Novgorod and Tver. But the church's power had limits. Boyar families, descended from Viking-era warlords and Mongol-era collaborators, still governed their estates like private fiefdoms, resisting efforts to standardize laws or taxes. Beyond the Kremlin's walls, danger loomed. The Crimean Tatars, successors to the Horde, raided as far as Moscow itself, while Poland-Lithuania charmed disaffected boyars. Russia's survival depended on a strong ruler, one who could force the boyars to obey, the church to comply, and the borders to hold. Soon that ruler would reveal himself, and his methods would shock the world. Ivan IV was born in 1530 into the powerful Rurik dynasty, the ruling family that had shaped Russia since the time of Rurik in the 9th century. His father, Vasily III, was Grand Prince of Moscow, the man who had consolidated much of northern Russia under Moscow's banner. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, was from a noble Lithuanian family with Tatar roots, a background that would later add fuel to boyar rivalries. Ivan's early years were marked by privilege, but also by tragedy. In 1533, when Ivan was just 3 years old, Vasily III died of an abscess in his leg. With her son too young to rule, Elena Glinskaya became regent. She proved a capable leader, continuing Vasily's policies of centralizing power and resisting boyar influence. But her sudden death in 1538, possibly by poison at the hands of rival noble families, plunged the court into chaos. From the age of 8, Ivan was effectively an orphan, living in the Kremlin under the nominal protection of powerful boyar clans. Instead of being nurtured, Ivan was neglected, at times even humiliated. Chroniclers describe scenes of Ivan and his younger brother Yuri wandering the palace halls hungry, poorly dressed, and largely ignored while the boyars feasted. The boyars, including powerful clans like the Schwiskis and the Belskis, treated Ivan like a puppet, his royal blood a prize to be controlled. These years of instability fostered deep resentment in Ivan, breeding suspicion and a fierce sense of isolation. Despite this, Ivan was intelligent and precocious. He read voraciously from religious and historical texts, studying the Bible, Chronicles, and even law codes. He developed a fascination with absolute authority, admiring the idea of a single ruler who could stand above the squabbling factions that had tormented his youth. By the time Ivan was 16, he had grown increasingly determined to seize real power. The young Grand Prince was aware that his predecessors, like his grandfather Ivan III, had begun to envision themselves not just as Grand Princes of Moscow, but as heirs to the Byzantine emperors. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 had left Moscow as the strongest center of Orthodox Christianity, and many saw it as the Third Rome. In a bold move to assert his authority and elevate his status above the fractious boyars, Ivan planned a coronation unlike any before in Russian history. Instead of simply being crowned Grand Prince of Moscow, he would assume the title of Tsar of all Russia, a title that linked him symbolically to the ancient Caesars of Rome and the Orthodox emperors of Byzantium. The ceremony, held in 1547 at the Dormition Cathedral in the Kremlin, was steeped in Byzantine ritual, symbolizing divine sanction of Ivan's rule. Ivan was crowned by Metropolitan Macarius, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, whose support was crucial to legitimizing his claim. By choosing the title of Tsar, Ivan declared himself not merely the first among equals, but the absolute autocrat of a unified Russian state, answerable only to God. Thus, from a neglected child in a court of vipers, Ivan had transformed himself into the first Tsar of all Russia, determined to forge a new, more centralized state, one that would bear both the glory and the scars of his reign. After his coronation in 1547, Ivan IV wasted no time in consolidating his power. That same year, at just 17 years old, he married Anastasia Romanovna, a noblewoman from the respected Romanov clan. Chosen through a traditional bride show, a ceremonial selection process, Ivan's marriage was both a political and personal decision. Anastasia brought stability to his life, offering him the affection and loyalty he had lacked in his tumultuous childhood. Chroniclers describe her as gentle and devout, a calming influence on Ivan's often volatile nature. Empowered by his new role as Tsar and his newfound domestic happiness, Ivan launched a series of reforms aimed at strengthening the Russian state. He inherited a realm still fractured by powerful boyar clans and the lingering shadow of Mongol domination. Determined to centralize power, Ivan convened the Zemsky Sobor, Russia's first national assembly of nobles, clergy, and townsmen. Though advisory in nature, it signaled Ivan's willingness to consult beyond the closed circle of the boyars, at least in the early years of his reign. In 1550, Ivan promulgated a new law code known as the Sudebnik of 1550, which standardized legal procedures and curtailed the abuses of local governors. This was a critical step in creating a more uniform and fair system of justice, at least in theory. He also established the Streltsy, a standing infantry force equipped with firearms, ensuring that he had a loyal military backbone that could counterbalance the power of the aristocracy. Ivan's administration also worked to reform taxation, curb corruption, and improve communication between the central government and the provinces. He encouraged trade with England via the White Sea port of Arkhangelsk, opening Russia to Western markets and ideas. But not all was well in Ivan's realm. In 1547, a devastating fire swept through Moscow, destroying large parts of the city and sparking a violent uprising against the boyars and even the Tsar himself. Rumors swirled that Anastasia's family, the Romanovs, were behind the disaster, a reminder of the persistent factionalism that threatened Ivan's authority. Determined to strengthen his hold, Ivan increasingly turned to loyal advisors known as the Chosen Council, a circle of trusted men including Metropolitan Macarius, Alexei Adashev, and Andrei Kurbsky. They helped him draft reforms and manage the state, but their influence would wane as Ivan's paranoia grew. For now, though, Ivan was still a young and energetic ruler, driven by a vision of a unified and powerful Russia. His marriage to Anastasia brought him a brief period of personal peace and a sense of purpose, but the cracks in the realm and in his own mind were already beginning to show. With the realm relatively stable under his early reforms, Ivan IV turned his gaze outward, seeking to expand Moscow's influence and secure Russia's borders. War was not new to Ivan's Russia. Indeed, the Grand Duchy of Moscow had long been forged through conquest. But under Ivan, the scale and ambition of these wars would reach new heights. His first major target was the Kazan, the last vestige of the Mongol states that had once dominated Russia. Ivan's campaigns against Kazan were motivated by both practical and symbolic aims, eliminating a persistent threat of Tatar raids, securing vital trade routes along the Volga, and asserting Russia's sovereignty over lands long ruled by Mongol overlords. After several failed attempts, Ivan launched a decisive siege in 1552. Employing a newly modernized army, including his elite Streltsy infantry and advanced artillery, he bombarded Kazan's formidable walls with unprecedented ferocity. After a brutal assault, Russian forces stormed the city, and Kazan fell. This victory was a crowning achievement for Ivan, celebrated as the liberation of Russia from the Mongol yoke. It also opened the gates for further expansion eastward. In 1556, Ivan turned his attention south to the Astrakhan, another Tatar stronghold on the lower Volga. This campaign, though less dramatic than Kazan, further secured Russia's control of vital trade routes connecting Europe, the Caspian Sea, and Central Asia. The conquest of Astrakhan cemented Moscow's authority over the Volga region and strengthened its claim as the defender of Orthodox Christianity against Islamic Khanates. Encouraged by these victories, Ivan looked west to the Livonian Confederation, a loose alliance of Germanic knights and bishops controlling trade along the Baltic coast. Control of Livonia promised access to lucrative European markets and a window to the wider world. In 1558, Ivan launched the Livonian War, hoping to secure Russia's place as a major European power. At first, Russian forces advanced swiftly, capturing key fortresses and threatening Livonia's collapse. But Ivan's ambitions soon met stiff resistance. Sweden, Poland, Lithuania, and Denmark all joined the fray, transforming a local conflict into a protracted and draining struggle. Russian armies faced devastating counterattacks, their supply lines stretched thin, and internal dissent began to grow. The Livonian War dragged on for decades, draining Russia's treasury and morale. It also exposed weaknesses in Ivan's administration and the limitations of his military reforms. By the 1570s, Russia faced simultaneous threats on multiple fronts: Swedish armies in the north, Crimean Tatar raids in the south, and growing unrest at home. Ivan's wars reshaped Russia's frontiers, adding vast territories and integrating new peoples into the Russian state. Yet they also sowed the seeds of crisis. The Livonian War, in particular, would strain the state's resources and deepen Ivan's mistrust of his own boyars. What began as a quest for glory and empire had become a quagmire of conflict, testing the very foundations of Ivan's rule and foreshadowing the darker chapters yet to come. By the early 1560s, Ivan IV's reign took a dark and ominous turn. His beloved wife, Anastasia Romanovna, died suddenly in 1560, possibly of poisoning, a suspicion that would haunt Ivan for the rest of his life. Grief-stricken and increasingly paranoid, Ivan became convinced that the boyars, the powerful noble families he had long distrusted, were plotting against him. This personal tragedy coincided with the growing strain of the Livonian War, which was draining the treasury and exposing weaknesses in the Russian state. Internal tensions flared as Ivan's military campaigns faltered. Famine gripped parts of the country, and the Crimean Tatars threatened Russia's southern borders. Ivan's suspicions deepened. He saw betrayal not just in foreign foes, but within his own court. In 1564, Ivan abruptly left Moscow, retreating to the small town of Alexandrova Sloboda. From there, he sent a dramatic letter accusing the boyars and clergy of treason and demanding their submission. The court was stunned. Facing chaos and the threat of civil war, the clergy and the people pleaded for Ivan's return, offering him absolute power to root out treachery. Seizing the moment, Ivan returned to Moscow in 1565 and established the Oprichnina, a separate state within Russia, governed solely by him and his loyal guards, the Oprichniki. Clad in black robes and riding black horses, the Oprichniki became symbols of terror, carrying severed dog heads on their saddles to signify their readiness to hunt down traitors. The Oprichnina was Ivan's instrument of control and retribution. He divided the country into two parts, the Oprichnina under his direct rule, and the Zemshchina, the remaining lands administered by the traditional boyar system. Through the Oprichnina, Ivan confiscated lands from powerful nobles, redistributed them to his loyalists, and executed anyone suspected of disloyalty. Whole cities like Novgorod in 1570 were subjected to brutal massacres. Ivan accused Novgorod of plotting to defect to Poland. His Oprichniki descended on the city, slaughtering thousands and burning it to the ground. The psychological impact on Russia was immense. The boyar aristocracy, once a check on royal power, was shattered and cowed. The population lived in fear, with denunciations, torture, and public executions becoming instruments of state policy. Ironically, even as Ivan consolidated his power through terror, the Livonian War continued to drain resources, and Russia's enemies, Sweden and Poland-Lithuania, pressed harder. The Crimean Tatars even sacked Moscow in 1571, burning much of the city and demonstrating the limits of Ivan's control. By the end of the Oprichnina in 1572, Ivan had succeeded in breaking the power of the boyars and centralizing authority in the hands of the Tsar. Yet his rule had grown increasingly erratic, marked by paranoia and violence. He had set out to strengthen Russia, but had also unleashed a reign of terror that scarred the land and earned him his chilling epithet, Ivan the Terrible. The seeds of crisis were sown. The once mighty state Ivan had forged would soon face the chaos of the time of troubles, a period of war, famine, and dynastic crisis that would test everything he had built. As the sun set on Ivan IV's reign, Russia stood transformed, both strengthened and scarred. Ivan's decades-long rule had expanded the borders of the state and left a lasting imprint on its institutions, but it had also fractured the nobility and left a legacy of fear and instability. Ivan's achievements cannot be denied. His conquests of Kazan and Astrakhan brought the Volga River under Moscow's control, opening trade routes to Central Asia and the Caspian Sea. These victories ended the threat of Tatar raids that had long plagued Russian lands and secured the steppe frontier. Ivan also sought to modernize the state's military, introducing the streltsy, a standing infantry armed with firearms, a move that set the stage for Russia's future as a formidable military power. Domestically, Ivan's Sudebnik of 1550 reformed the legal code, introducing more consistent procedures and limiting the power of corrupt local officials. His convening of the Zemsky Sobor, Russia's first national assembly, marked an early attempt at inclusive governance, although this would fade as his paranoia grew. Ivan also encouraged trade with England via Arkhangelsk, forging connections with Western Europe that would later shape Russia's economy. Yet these achievements came at a terrible price. Ivan's Oprichnina had shattered the unity of the realm. The boyar aristocracy, once a pillar of Russian society, was decimated by purges and confiscations. Whole regions like Novgorod were laid waste by his wrath, leaving scars that would not soon heal. In 1581, during one of his infamous fits of rage, Ivan struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with a staff, killing him. This act robbed Russia of its most capable successor and plunged the dynasty into uncertainty. When Ivan died in 1584, he left the throne to his physically and mentally weak son, Fyodor I. Fyodor, known as Fyodor the Bell-ringer, was ill-suited to rule. Real power fell to his brother-in-law, Boris Godunov, who became the de facto ruler. When Fyodor died childless in 1598, the Rurik dynasty that Ivan had sought to strengthen came to an end. What followed was the time of troubles, a period of dynastic crisis, famine, foreign invasion, and widespread civil unrest. Russia, leaderless and vulnerable, was invaded by Polish and Swedish forces. Rival claimants to the throne, known as false Dimitris, rose and fell like shadows, each claiming to be the rightful heir. Ivan's legacy thus became a double-edged sword. His drive to centralize power made Russia stronger in some ways, but his brutality and paranoia left it fragile and unprepared for crisis. The autocratic rule he perfected set a pattern that future czars, including Peter the Great, would both emulate and struggle against. Even today, Ivan's reign sparks debate. Was he a visionary who forged a powerful state, or a tyrant whose cruelty nearly destroyed it? Perhaps, as so often in history, he was both, a ruler who embodied the contradictions of his time, leaving behind a Russia forever changed. The echoes of his reign still linger in Russia's corridors of power, in the czars and commissars who followed his path, and in the stories told around crackling fires on cold winter nights. Ivan the Terrible's legacy is not just a tale of conquest and cruelty. It is a reminder that power can both unite and destroy, and that even the mightiest of rulers must one day face the judgment of history. If you find this video interesting, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What surprised you the most about Ivan's life? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating figures.